We want to hear from Reverend James White this morning. So if you would give me just a moment to introduce him and to make sure that you know a little bit more about our invited speaker this morning. Reverend James White is currently the Executive Vice President of Organizational Relations for the YMCA of the Triangle. In addition to his work at the YMCA, he is also the Senior Pastor of Christ Our King Community Church. Reverend White is a member of the National Training and Leadership Development Advisory Board for the YMCA of the USA and has contributed as an author for several publications, including American Outlook, Planting Seeds of Hope, How to Reach African Youth, and the African American Devotional Bible. So at this time, as our guests continue to log in and arrive, Reverend White, and to the audience, let us prepare now to receive Reverend James White. Good morning.
Good morning, Dr. Turner. It is good to be with you. As I said, my name is James Alfred White, and my father's name is John Franklin White. His father, he never met. His mother's name was Eloise White. Never met his father, didn't know, he felt his middle name Franklin came from them. John White, though, ended up in North Carolina, raised by his Uncle Fred and Aunt Alice because his mother had an alcohol problem and his grandmother had an alcohol problem. My mother's name is Eleanor Burke White. Eleanor Burke White, also born in Paquemis County, North Carolina, the daughter of Clarence and Sarah Burke. Does not know who her grandfather was on her father's side because we're not sure whether he was white or black. There's a narrative and story there. But Sarah Burke, Sarah Johnson, was the one whose brothers ended up also owning land after their sharecropping reality that they lived in. You see, my parents were born in 1923. What I'm going to be talking about today is critical to understand your history because we carry and we walk with our histories even now. And what is unique, but what is tragic and yet triumph is that for us as Black people, many of us cannot go back except for a few generations, and maybe even some listening to me even right now, not because of the magnificent genius of who you are as a Black person, but because of the brokenness of humanity, you may not even be able to go beyond your mother. Our history, though, lives within us. But part of the reason why it's important is because our history, our story makes us visible. One of the authors that pierced my soul when I read them in high school, in my freshman year of high school, was Ralph Ellison. Ralph Ellison, his title alone gives us a clue into what the reality of the book would be about, but unfortunately, we still fit into that reality. Even the opening of the book where Ralph Ellison says these words, "I am an invisible man. No, I'm not a spook like those who haunted Edgar Allan Poe, nor am I one of your Hollywood ectoplasms. I'm a man of substance, of flesh and bone, fiber and liquids. I might even be said to possess a mind. I am invisible simply because, hear this, people refuse to see me." You see, our history, our story is important. Here's why. Because it makes us seen. It creates flesh and bone and reality and story that's important. The invisible, history causes the invisible to become visible. See, our lives are contained in our stories. One of my favorite scholars is Dr. John Henrik Clarke, and he was a scholar, an educator, a writer. You ought to Google him, extraordinary. But Dr. Clarke said these words. He says, "To me, history is the clock that people use to tell their political and cultural time of day. It is also a clock that they use to find themselves on the map of human geography. The role of history in the final analysis is to tell people where they have been, where they could be, where they are, and what they are. Most importantly, the role of history is to tell people where there still must be." To me, the relationship, listen to this, the relationship of a people to their history is the same relationship as a child to its mother. There's an image that I want you to see that really is an image that gives us part of the importance for us in this conversation of history for us as men. And this image was an image that took place again in the last days of Dr. Martin Luther King in Memphis, where there was a group of sanitation workers who had been killed. And Dr. King, being a man of the movement, a man whose story we often hijack for our own political purposes, Dr. King spent his last moments representing sanitation workers because they have a story and are part of their history as well. And in Memphis, these men walked to the streets with a sign that still speaks to us today. I am a man. One of my favorite current authors is Jamar Tisby, and Jamar Tisby talks about the truthful story of the church. And he says this, he says, we have a choice. We can treasure a moment, or we can be stewards of our memories. And my hope is that we understand that our history makes us visible, but our history cannot just simply be moments, but memories. And even today, as you're going to spend this time today, and as you're going to hear from thought leaders from a variety of realities, from a variety of disciplines, I hope you understand we have an opportunity not to just have had a moment, but to treasure our memories. What I've learned and what I am learning is that we have to be stewards of our memories ourselves, because if we're not, we have to be stewards of our American experience, because if we're not careful, someone else will take our memories and turn them into moments and misinterpret them. If we don't live into them carefully and truthfully, someone might think that taking the knee during the national anthem is more dangerous than a policeman whose duty is to protect and serve would have his knee on the neck of a Black man. If we don't treasure this memory important and contain it, it will be misused and misused. See, our history, secondly, also has secrets that must be told. The invisible man must become visible. See, one of the things that becomes real important as we understand our history is time, and we often have a distorted view of time. I want you to see an image that I really want to pay some attention to, because this even helps us understand how to make our history visible. Because all too often when you see a timeline, and there's been much argument about 1619 Project, which has incredible value and importance, sometimes I think even we miss the importance of our timeline. As I said here, I want you to understand, sometimes we think history was long ago. No, history is with us. Sometimes we mistakenly begin our timeline as Black men and as Americans, period, because what I'm seeing speaks to Black men, Black women, white women, to any narrative or any person who lives in America. But sometimes we make the mistake, especially as Black people, of starting with our narrative from the trauma and tragedy of the transatlantic slave journey. The problem with that is we make our origin as if we were created as a product rather than as a person. And when you create your origin from a story of being product, from a story of being cargo, from a story of being abused, misused, and being sold as property, when your story begins there, you miss the dynamic of your real story. Because I would suggest that all too often American history begins with us as a product. And you see that even in our beloved Constitution, where we were 3/5 of a person, you see that in our legacy and in our history, because we start as a product. It is why in the 1600s, when the colonies were formed, and you had to understand and do something because of Bacon's rebellion. I'm saying words that you'll have to Google later and study and know your story. But Bacon's rebellion, which caused people to create the false construct of whiteness, because you do know that there is no such thing as a white person. That's race is a sociological constructed reality that again was created to again tell the false narrative of a people who people did not know, and to even give a false narrative of our real beginning. What am I trying to say? We must always know our history long before 1619, long before we came to the shores and we were products instead of people here, because what made it brutality, what made it even so, again, in our history, in our story, even so tragic from trauma, is that thousands of years ago, we were, and still are a magnificent people. There's a reason why no one tells the true story of Africa. There's a reason why it's a distorted, even in our narratives and even in our stories. How in the world could many of us have watched Tarzan thinking somehow a white baby dropped out of a plane somehow can become king of a place, and everybody who is African is afraid of him? One man who never even lived it, and man, he is so superior that he even can talk to the animals. How did we ever believe that narrative? Because some of us don't even know the narrative of our own lives around the product reality of history, of American history. Because when you go back thousands of years, you realize that our story were people who were builders of the pyramid of Giza. Our story were people who had a command of science and technology, of libraries that contain knowledge in Timbuktu. Our story goes all the way back, Queen of Sheba, kings and queens. So those who became products of those 240 years of slavery were robbed of humanity. And that's why that first image is important. I am a man. And my history, my real history, lets me know that civilizations and constructs were not some new idea I learned in the academy of many white Americans. It's not somehow you saved me from my civilization. No, you robbed me and I recaptured my civilization. And that's what those brothers and sisters, those friends, my legacies, my parents, my great-great-great-grandparents of those 240 years of struggle, they were continuing, not recreating, but continuing the line of kings and lineage culture. Yeah, they mentioned that I'm a pastor, but this was also strange because even when you open up your Bible, how in the world could anyone say anything as ridiculous that it's a white man's religion if you've only read the Bible through the lenses of a white man? That is why it is strange to me that anyone would even say that, because it would be the dumbest thing for the white man to do, to write a Bible that shows me my narrative and my lineage, but you can't even get out of chapter 2 of Genesis to see where civilization and the Tigris and the Euphrates. But this is why reading and study is dangerous, because our history gives us a sense of our humanity. And we are magnificent humans in those 240 years that were dehumanized. And not only 240 years of dehumanization, but then another 99 years of Jim Crow, of separate but equal, and the ridiculous nature of a Supreme Court case that would say Plessy versus Ferguson. That again, when we get into skin tones and skin color and the reality of what is white and what is black, and how you could go from one state to another state and be black or white. Yes, our story becomes very critical and important because history is today. Because the first coup d'etat did not take place January 6th. January 6th was in the legacy and horror of 1860, 1898, right here in North Carolina, right here, only about an hour away from where I live, Wilmington, North Carolina. That was the first insurrection internally of white men who couldn't deal with the reality of the rebuilding, of Reconstruction. Why did it happen so fast for us as a people? Because once again, we were simply calling upon the legacies and the life of our history. And also from a theological center that gave us humanity in a Christian reality that most of us have already thrown away, unfortunately, because we don't know our story and our history. Rather than listening to Frederick Douglass, who said these words in his autobiography, between the Christianity of this land and the Christianity of Christ, I recognize the widest possible difference. Because for me to accept the slave-holding, brutal Christianity of this land, I cannot accept that because I must accept the peaceable, loving love of Jesus Christ. But then thirdly, our history also teaches us that we're not superheroes. We are magnificently human. Because yes, after those 240 years of slavery, that our humanity right here in North Carolina, that we built political systems and structures to move in society. We had businesses, we had newspapers, communication. And again, Obama was not the first post-racial era that we think that we had. We thought after Reconstruction it was going to be post-racial. And so the reality is we were human. But history didn't even tell us that. We don't even have that in our curriculum. And many of us, unfortunately, it is sad if you're just hearing about 1898 today. Because there's also 1920 in Florida, OC, Florida, where a mob of white people killed 60 people because of the genius and the leadership of their Blackness. But that wasn't even taught until June 25th, 2020. The Tulsa Riots, which dealt with, once again, the entrepreneurial genius of our story, of our history. 1921, 300 people killed. Some of us didn't even learn about it until watching the series The Watchmen, but it wasn't taught until 2002. See, when you don't teach the story or history correctly, you develop what I call icons who become idols, because all of us, here's the problem, many of us think you can make yourself an icon. And we even believe that because we too have marked those who think they can make a hero and make a statement, other than understanding the idea of greatness is part of our legacy. Because long before there was a Joe Louis, there was a Jack Johnson who was a brother that had a sense of self that no one could imagine. Jack had his issues. But Muhammad Ali falls in the legacy of a Jack Johnson in being able to say what one would want to say. Because we're human. And sometimes we make icons that move us away from the genius of our humanity as Black men. And we're trying to be an icon. It's the false notion of the NBA. It's the false notion of the NFL. Hear me, understand there was more to what made Michael Jordan than simply his skills, because there's some brothers who Mike will even let you know were on the playground and other places that had skills even match his, but he became this icon that had capitalistic intentions as well. Don't have time to unpack that, but we even turned Dr. King into an icon, and we reduced the civil rights movement to one person and 4 words. Dr. King was human. And sometimes we juxtapose Malcolm X and Dr. King against one another in our human. Yes, Malcolm X was linguistically lethal, but I appreciate Dr. King because whereas Malcolm X could give words and ideas that would put people to flight, Dr. King was one of those people who walked in the presence of broken humanity, knew that there would be stones and things thrown at him. He walked in the presence. He didn't just talk about the present, and he forced and revealed the terror of that humanity. Our history reminds us that we're human, and it makes us visible. And that becomes important because that legacy is very important. Because when you become human, you now understand that when you become an icon, icons are often used to colonize ideas in people. And some of us have pushed even others whom we know that the goal is to become an idol, an icon. No, icons can be pushed aside. But men and women with stories and history can create legacies that are lasting. Finally, it's interesting, but one of the places where we see this, and this is what I love about the genius, again, of the legacy of who I am as a Black man, is the genius of that, and even the supernatural dynamic of that. And I'm not trying to convince anybody to change their theological position, but when you look at your history, you have to credit that even through music, even through music, that history and the story is still told. Some of us have missed this, and this is what I love. I will be 60 years old in a few months, and I love it because now the history lives within my soul, and I've had a chance to see it. And what's interesting to me is even in our music, and I love all types of music, but even in our music, we see our history. See, it was 1975 when 15-year-old Carlton Rittenhour heard the Isley brothers say these words: "Time is truly wasting. There's no guarantee. Smiles in the making. You got to fight the powers that be. Got so many forces staying on the scene, giving up all around me. Faces full of pain. I tried to play the music, but say the music is too loud. I tried to talking about it. I got a big run around. When I roll with the punches, I get knocked to the ground. With all this bull going down, time is truly wasting. Got no guarantees. Smile is in the making. You got to fight powers that be." That history, that story, that legacy, 14 years later, Carlton was asked in 1989 by Spike Lee, who was making a movie called Doing the Right Thing. He needed an anthem. And Carlton, who became Chuck D with his boy Flavor Flav and Public Enemy, they took those same ideas, that same legacy. In 1989, a number, another summer, sound of the funky drummer, music hitting your heart, because I know you got soul, brothers and sisters. Hey, listen, if you're missing, you all swinging while I'm singing, giving what you're getting, knowing what I'm knowing, while the band, black band sweating and the rhythms are rolling. Got to give us what we want, got to give us what we need. Listen to this. Our freedom of speech is freedom of death. We got to fight powers that be. Let me hear you say, fight the powers, fight powers, fight the powers that be. And in closing, it doesn't stop because that legacy goes on. In 2020, at the Soul Train Awards, some of the greatest MCs, Rhapsody, Nas, would end their song with a remix of Fight the Power. Elvis was a hero to the most, but he never meant to me, you see. Straight up racist and sucker was simple and plain. F him and John Wayne. Because I'm black and I'm proud, I'm ready, I'm hype, plus I'm amped. Most of my heroes don't depend on no stamp. Simpler look back and you looking fine. None but rednecks for 400 years if you check. Don't worry, be happy. It was a #1 jam. Hit me if I slap me right here. Let's get this party started. Right on, come on. What we got to say, people to the people, no delay. Make everybody see in order to fight the powers that be. History makes us visible. We can't afford to continue to be invisible men and invisible families and women. History makes us sing. History has secrets that must be told, even our secrets that reveal that we are human, because we don't have to be heroes. Heroes is an idea of colonialism in order to move things forward. But the genius and legacy of our story is we are human. And as humans can move things forward in such a way that we can fight the powers that be. Let's not forget our stories.
Wow. Wow. As we get ready to bring Dr. Turner back to the stage to speak with you for a moment and do some Q&A, I just want to say, look, technical difficulties up front. Wow. What a powerful message. And I certainly do appreciate you for investing your time with us. Dr. Turner's going to take a moment and do a brief Q&A and short conversation with you, and then announce our next part of the program.
To all of our attendees this morning, did we just not go from 0 to 10? From the words of Reverend, brother, historian, orator, James White, Thank you so much for shining that light this morning. There's so many points that you made. I just was trying to keep up. But thank goodness for technology and this being recorded. But we must definitely take these words of wisdom that Brother White has shared with us. We must read. We must read with understanding. We must read to get understanding. We have to put ourselves in a better position as a people, as a person, as a brother. And so you have the beginning of a challenge, is what I will say from Brother White, to increase yourself so that as a member of this human society, you will not take a back seat to anyone else. So we thank you for that. We will take a look at the chat to see if there are a question or two for Brother White. But let me ask, while that is happening, Brother White, you mentioned a couple of authors. Is there something, one or two books that you would recommend in terms of just general reading? Where could someone start?
If you have never read Carter G. Woodson, The Miseducation of the Negro, that is a very good place to start. One of the things that's true of literature and of history is that it's timeless. And so you're going to read him and think he's speaking to you today. If you've never read Autobiography of Malcolm X, you need to do that to get involved in the story. If you've never read, once again, John Hope Franklin's Up from Slavery, you really want to read Dr. Franklin. I'm sorry, that was Booker T. Washington's Up from Slavery. You want to read that. You want to read W.E.B. Du Bois' Souls of Black Folk. Because many of the authors and you want to read Baldwin as well. Because many of the people who today, many of their ideas, again, Ta-Nehisi Coates would tell you that Baldwin influenced him. So many of the current writers and authors have been influenced by the classical work because their ideas and their thoughts are timeless. And so that's why, and if you've never read any of Dr. King's speeches, his speech Beyond Vietnam, you want to go beyond I Have a Dream. And then if you've never read Letters from a Burma, so there's some basic texts that you want to read, but you read asking this question, then how does this intersect with our reality today? And you will understand, for example, I know we're going to be talking about law enforcement. You'll understand that these are not new conversations. And the question is, how some of the solutions we have worked? And anything we talk about has a root. So you can't talk about law enforcement without talking about and understanding the history of why law enforcement was created. And so everything that you hear today, there's a root to it. When you're talking about entrepreneurship, you got to understand entrepreneurship didn't start with America's form of what I call brutal capitalism, but there was entrepreneurship that took place in African nations and what have you. So all of that becomes important to give you a sense of self and a sense of identity. And the other thing I pointed to, not just because I'm a pastor, but I would even get some different lens, and that even includes the Bible, for example, and read it analytically and what have you, and begin to look at the whole story. But I will make sure that Substantial has a list of some books. I'll give a bibliography that we can send out.
Excellent. That will be a major plus, and we appreciate that list. Many of those I have also read, and they are what is going to be an inspiration to so many others and add to what you have shared this morning. Any last comment that you would like to make to further emphasize your point, or encourage, motivate, uplift our brothers? Bring this to a close.
Dr. Turner, here's what I would say. The order of today is humility. I think sometimes we miss our connection generation. My father, who was and mother born in 1923, so they're going through Jim Crow. So their whole narrative is a narrative of survival. I'm born in 1961, Civil Rights Act was signed in 1964, and therefore their gains that were made, my generation had a narrative of success. This generation, born 90 and 2000, what we're seeing, reason why, yes, we needed a Black Lives Matter, we need a younger generation, because now we've got a narrative of significance. But survival, success, and significance all need to be in line together to form a coalition that will bring change.
All right. Survival, significance.
All right.
Got it. Thank you so much. Thank you very much.
All right.
All right. Have a great day, and hopefully you
Thank you, bro.
can hang in there with us. All right.